Tonight we have with us from the Vermont Humanities Council, Mark Fitzsimmons, who is the recently hired Director of Public Programs for the Council. And he will introduce Haviland Smith.
Thanks, Jerry. And good evening. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here tonight. I'm from Montpelier, and it was a delightful trip down, and it's delightful to be back in Brattleboro. I'm glad to welcome you on behalf of the Council, the Vermont Humanities Council, and on behalf of the Brooks Library. Before introducing Haviland, I want to take a minute, less than a minute, to say a little bit about the Council and its work. Oh, you can't hear me? Let me try. Is this better? Hello? Yes. Oh, my goodness. Thank you. The Vermont Humanities Council is a statewide organization that is dedicated to supporting and facilitating conversations on a statewide basis about issues that are critical to our local communities, our statewide community, and indeed to the national agenda. The Council tonight is sponsoring these kinds of talks at 9 different locations around the state. There are probably 800 to 900 people, such as yourselves, gathered throughout the state to hear presentations and to participate in discussions, such as we are doing tonight. By the end of the year, there will probably be something on the order of 1,400 such gatherings throughout the state. Some larger, some smaller, but all of them are focused on, and all of them are in support of the application of the humanities and the values that are encoded in the humanities. All of these groups are directed at informing the community and the community discussion of values. By way of going forward, let me introduce Haviland Smith. Haviland, as I'm sure you all know, is a former CIA station chief. He spent the better part of the Cold War in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East. He was in DC and as well as in Langley. Amongst his many varied obligations and responsibilities, he was the CIA's counterterrorism chief, and he was at one time the executive assistant to the director of the CIA. Ladies and gentlemen, Haviland Smith.
My grandmother, who was a fine New England woman, used to say, never clap until you've heard what he has to say. Someone asked me what I was going to talk about, and I said I wasn't quite sure, that we'd see how it went as I went along. But what I want to talk about is the Middle East and U.S. foreign policy, specifically in that part of the world. There are lots of solutions to our issues in the Middle East. I hope to give you, in my remarks, a framework for your thought processes on these issues, as well as for your questions at the end of this session. The purpose of the presentation is to sort of set the table for you without inordinately prejudicing the outcome. And I think what I'd like to start with is a look at our national interests in the Middle East, because I think we lose sight of that all too often. Unless we understand what those national interests are, it's very hard to decide whether or not foreign policies are valid or invalid. The first question is, what do we really want out there? Do we want to impose democracy on that part of the world? It certainly hasn't worked very well for us, and I think if any of you have looked at that part of the world and the religion under which it functions, it'll be pretty clear to you that the imposition of democracy has about a zero chance of success. These are people who are perfectly comfortable with their belief systems, perfectly comfortable with their political structures, and see no reason to fiddle around with something that they view as a rather anarchistic process. So perhaps it's better to think of the Middle East as a place where we should be wanting stability. because in effect instability in that part of the world is really a terrifying prospect for policymakers in this country, as you are now observing and have been for the last 6 years. My pitch is that's what we should be looking for. Our policies should be geared toward the creation and maintenance of stability in that part of the world. And there are a lot of caveats that go with that, and we'll get to it as we go along. Terrorism is another problem that we see stemming from there. And I will tell you that terrorism left to its own devices tends to last about 10 years. Different groups practicing terrorism in different parts of the world last, generally speaking, about 10 years. At the end of that time, there was a study made not very long ago. I think it was the Rand Corporation study. It looked at 638 terrorist groups. At the end of 10 years, I could have written down here. 75% of them had been absorbed into the political systems which they had opposed. 18% of them had been defeated by police activities, and 7% by military activities. Now, if you look at the progression there from the best, which is political absorption, down to the worst, which is military activity, then you have to start thinking immediately, what the hell are we doing out there? So at any rate, that's another issue, terrorism, and it's going to be integral to that part of the world, particularly as long as our foreign policies in that part of the world continue to create an environment which is conducive to the continuation of those terrorist movements. And that's the kind of environment we have created over the past 6-7 years. Economic issues are of course very important to the world. So much of the world's oil sits underground in the Middle East, around the Persian Gulf, and that will remain a major issue for us particularly, and for Europe, as long as we have not created any alternatives to that source of energy. And that will be a constant issue for us in forming a rational foreign policy for the area. So it's an extremely important part of it. A lot of people believe, and I think wrongly, that our invasion of Iraq was prompted primarily by oil concerns. I do not buy that, and if you like, we can get into that a little bit better. But oil is a fungible commodity. It goes as the market wants it to go. It's always available if someone will pay the price. It is not a weapon in that sense against us. In the sense of pure foreign policy considerations, we are in a position where we have lost most of our friends, particularly in our dealings with the Middle East, and it is going to be extremely important for us to reestablish those relationships with our old allies and friends, because that's the only way you can deal effectively with most of the problems that exist in the Middle East, starting with terrorism and going right on through the panoply of Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And finally, of course, there is the immutable issue in the Middle East, which is Israel. We are not going to jeopardize Israel in any way. No American government ever will, and nor should it. But there are things about that situation that are a carbuncle on the Middle East that have to be discussed and are not being discussed. So we'll get to that too as well. I would like to give you my notion of the realities in America and in the Middle East as they exist today and have for the past number of years. The first really great international dichotomy that America has is the concept of American exceptionalism. It's what made this country, it's what keeps us together. We are diverse. We are made up of all kinds of dribs and drabs from all over the world. And our exceptionalism, our notion of our own exceptionalism, is really the binding element in the fabric of our society. The notion that we have the greatest system in the world, the best economic system, the best political system, and that we should be envied by everybody in the world. I mean, it goes back to the earliest settlers here, the notion of the shining city on the hill. Not a bad notion. we'll talk about that too. But in that context, the problem is that like any messianic people, and we are messianic about our system, generally speaking, we feel we have to bring it to everybody else. We have to share this with everyone else. And we are I don't mean to be ugly about this, but we are a naive, egocentric, ethnocentric, and I don't quite how to say this without being too bad, messianic country, nation. And we need to share this wealth with the rest of the world. And that is a motivator, clearly, of what we're doing in the Middle East today. And as such, it is the basis of one of the greatest problems that we have in the Middle East at this particular time. The effects of 8 years of neoconservative foreign policy on this country you can't deny them. I mean, the concept of the neoconservatives that we are in a position as the unipower in the world to do whatever we like. That's the basis of this. We must look at the world in terms of right and wrong, and we must go on the side of righteousness. It's almost religious. It's that bad. And you can read it. Read Professor Strauss. Read his writings from the University of Chicago. It's all right there. They disparage diplomacy and international organizations as far as and allegiances of any kind. As far as the neoconservatives are concerned, the only important tool of foreign policy is your military weapon, and that should be the first thing that you use. And if you look back at what we've been doing since 9/11, that's pretty much where we've gone and pretty much where we are today. So the effects of that have forced us to focus on the Middle East, and probably to our detriment. Now with a new, here we go. With a new management in charge in Washington, there is the opportunity to relook this. Well, I guess I know where you guys stand. Please, for any of you who disagree, no raw vegetables or eggs. The effects of our war on terror are, in my world of watching terrorism, almost as unsettling as the effects of the neocon foreign policy. We have, given the opportunity to deal with terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda, we probably have done everything we could wrong. We have determined that this is a military problem. We have decided to have a war on terrorism, which is sort of like a war on set shots. I don't know how you have a war on terrorism. It's a war on a tactic. You don't have wars on tactics. It has been a recruiting tool for Al-Qaeda and its affiliate organizations. The effects of Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and all of our handling of our captives have been the best recruiting tools, according to new recruits to Al-Qaeda, that exist for Al-Qaeda. And look what we've done to ourselves, which I really don't want to dwell on because this is really a foreign policy talk and not an internal American talk, but look what we've done to ourselves. We have decided that safety is more important to us than our freedoms. And as Benjamin Franklin famously said, if you give up your freedom for safety, you get neither. And pretty much that's the direction we've been heading in. The curtailments, all of which have been approved by us and our representatives in Washington, the curtailments on our civil liberties, starting with wireless wiretaps. What do they do in libraries? They do something awful to people in libraries, looking for reading lists from clients like us. They have jeopardized our military establishment with our torturing, because You have to be on the highest moral level if you're a military organization. You cannot become involved, and you can't let your country become involved in torture, because that's ultimately what's likely to happen to your people if they get captured. So what we've done is we've bartered away in bits and pieces some of our civil liberties for some notion of safety, which I think is spurious. We're no more safe today than we were on 8/11. And no less secure. We are vulnerable because it's the nature of our society to be vulnerable. You can't be free and safe at the same time. The two don't go together. If you're free, you're not safe. If you're safe, you're not free. And that's where we are with that. In practical terms, the realities of the Iraq invasion. We have suffered a major worldwide loss of status. We've lost most of our old allies, with the exception of the Brits. God knows why they put us up with us. I can't imagine, but they have. God bless them. We have alienated people who have a stake, people who are stakeholders in the Middle East. We have told them we are not interested in what they have to say. We do not seek their counsel, and that we will do what we choose to do. That's not a way to make friends. And I will say here, parenthetically, that if your concerns with terrorism are real and rational, the only way you get to indigenous terrorist groups, in the sense of an intelligence organization, is through liaison relationships, liaison operations with the host security services in the countries where those organizations exist. I can't go to Baghdad and walk around on it. I can't go to Baghdad and walk around on the streets, period. But I can't go to Beirut and walk around on the street and not be anything other than what I am. I can't do that in Pakistan. In Pakistan, I am obvious. And we don't have many people whom the government chooses to clear who are capable of going to Pakistan and seeing whether or not they can recruit members of Al-Qaeda in the Northwest Territories. So the only way you can do that is through the Pakistan Intelligence Service or the Afghan Intelligence Service or whatever it is, indigenous people working against their own people. So that these relationships, government to government relationships, have a direct negative or positive impact on intelligence relationships between intelligence services. And when those relationships are bad at the national level, they are not going to help us at the intelligence level, and that's where we need it when we're dealing with terrorism. We are stuck in Iraq. I've said for well over a year that it didn't really matter who got elected in day before yesterday's election, that it will not be easy to get out of Iraq. My further suspicion is that Iraq may very well be the undoing of President Obama, unless he deals far more creatively with it than he has given any indication of doing. We are stuck in Afghanistan because Obama, like McCain and President Bush, have decided that the answer to that problem, which is an insurgency, is a major difference. If you like, we can talk about that too. Major difference between insurgencies and terrorist organizations. That's an insurgency, and they're going to take it on with military power. We hear cries for 2 more brigades to be moved from Iraq into Afghanistan. Look at a map of Afghanistan. If you think that Iraq is a problem, look at Afghanistan. I mean, it makes the entire state of Vermont look like downtown New York City. It really does. It is the wildest, most unconquerable country that you've ever seen. It's gigantic in size. Estimates are that it would take at least 500,000 troops to be able to pacify the country in any practical way. It's a nightmare when it comes to talking about how you're going to deal with it. And the fact of the matter is, if you read your history, no foreign power has ever conquered that country. They are tough-minded, tribal-centered people who mistrust foreigners for very good reasons, because everybody on the face of the earth has tried at one time or another to conquer them unsuccessfully. So from a purely practical point of view of what the hell are you going to do with Afghanistan, the wrong answer, without talking about any of the right answers, the wrong answer is a military operation to deal with that particular insurgency. That's a direct outcome of Iraq. Because Obama's right, we gave up on finishing the job in Iraq in Afghanistan when we moved our troops into Iraq. We are in deep military, economic, and political trouble in that part of the world as a result of the Iraq invasion. Nobody gives a damn what we think. Nobody cares what America thinks. The Israelis are now talking to the Turks and the Syrians, moderated by one of the Gulf states. We're not even involved. We're lucky we even found out about it. They've given up on us out there. They just don't care. The Iranians look at us and say, we have nothing to fear from these people. There's nothing that they can do that's politically acceptable on an international level that can hurt us. And if you think about it, there really isn't much we can do. We are so preoccupied with these other problems that we've created for ourselves with this war of choice in Iraq. So in effect, we have marginalized ourselves in the Middle East. Middle Eastern realities, I think I've trashed America enough, or at least I've trashed this administration. I should say here that I don't think we've gone by. I think there is still an opportunity for us to redeem ourselves if we go about it in a different way. I think we can reestablish some credibility in that part of the world, some influence in events out there, if we change our policies. In the Middle East, the realities are terrifying. Islam is divided between Shia and Sunni. They don't like each other. 700 years. They haven't liked each other. They kill each other at the drop of a hat. And they're going to keep right on doing that. It's sort of like what we have them here in Tennessee, don't we? The Martins and the McCoys or something. Hatfields. The reckless mountain boys. Well, that's what those Shias and Sunnis are. You think they're bad? Wait till you see us in Afghanistan. Ooh, those guys are tough. We have ethnic divisions. We have Kurds. We have Arabs. We have Persians, Turks, Turkmens. We got them spread out all over the place. None of them like each other. They've been doing this for millennia. They know how to deal with their own environments for their own survivals. And here we are in the middle of it all, tossing everything into a cocked hat and creating problems for them. So there's a real issue there for us. There's oil. Middle East oil is incredibly important to the rest of the world. We can't really get along without it right now. Maybe we will be in a period of time, but right now we can't get along without it. Europe and East Asia are almost totally dependent on it. So that's an interesting part of what's going on out there. There are Muslim issues. There's the Arab-Israeli conflict, which the Arabs see as grossly unfair. And the Arabs see, whether they're right or wrong is irrelevant, it's the way they see it. They see American policy in the Middle East as very uneven, very uneven-handed. There is the issue of American support of repressive Arab regimes, which rankles with the Arabs who live under those repressive people. And if you think about it, there aren't any non-repressive Arab regimes. And these are our friends in the Middle East. And there is the stationing of American troops on holy Muslim soil, particularly in Saudi Arabia, where it causes real political problems for the Saudis and for us. And then finally there's the concept of the occupation, the invasion and occupation of an Arab country by a Western army. They have a lot of experience with this, you will think back to the Crusades and before that. A lot of experience with this. So that the realities in the Middle East serve only to complicate issues. And if you don't understand those realities, you're going to do things that don't make an awful lot of sense. And I think a lot about this. I used to say, not without reason, that American foreign policy was, particularly in important cases, was not necessarily built on the objective facts in the area concerned. That it was more likely to be built on the internal political needs of the administration in power. And if you look back on the history of foreign affairs, there's an awful lot of that, and that's pretty true. But recently, I've got another thing that I'm chewing on, and that is that every time you have an outgroup, as the Bush people were the outgroup before the 2000 election, you have all these brilliant academicians who have thought about these problems for years and have figured out just exactly what needs to be done. And I'm sure that the Obama camp has a group of brilliant academicians who figured out everything that's been done wrong for the last 8 years, and they figured out exactly what they're going to do. The problem is that these brilliant academicians have absolutely no experience in the area that they're talking about. They're talking on a theoretical, philosophical level without any really practical input of reality on the ground in the area. And that happens over and over and over again. That's how we got the neocons. You know who the neocons were in the beginning? Scoop Jackson's people. They were Democrats. They were Scoop Jackson's hawkish Democrats. And they sort of migrated surreptitiously into the Republican Party, where they've caused inestimable mischief for the last 8 years. Do we have a role in Palestine? My take on Palestine right now is that we have probably marginalized ourselves out of almost any role. But I noticed in some of the responses that were on the BBC and on CNN International that there's a lot of hope in the Middle East about this past election. And that hope, I will translate that hope for you. That hope is that America will not disengage on the Palestine issue, and that America will play some sort of constructive role in the mitigation of those conflicts. So there's probably some potential for us there. But right now, we're in trouble on the Arab-Israeli issue, and this is at a really important time from the Israeli point of view. The demographics in Israel are such that they really need to find a solution, or all of a sudden they're going to find themselves either as a non-democracy or as a minority in their own country. So this thing is building in every single direction. It really needs to be addressed. And it seems to me as a bystander and onlooker that they are people who are not really capable of doing this on their own. It's too heated, it's too passionate, it's too angry, it's been going on too long. I don't see them getting it. Iran. Oh, yes. There's been a lot of talk about taking out Iran's nuclear, whatever it is. We're not quite sure, I think, what it is, but their nuclear refining capability. And I certainly understand that. I mean, I can understand why the Israelis don't want Iran to be a nuclear power. I really understand that. But I don't think that that's the answer to anybody's problems. I think if we were to do that, either in a conventional or in a nuclear way, we would probably prolong the acquisition of a weapon by the Iranians but we certainly wouldn't stop it. I spent a tour in that country. They're absolutely fascinating people with a very real sense of their own history and their own destiny. Educated, most of them in the West. They're bright, intelligent, involved people who are critical of their own system, their own clergy, their own government, and who think America and the West is absolutely wonderful. We have friends who've been over a number of times, and every time they come back, different people come back and say, they just love us over there. They tell us, don't bomb this place. If you bomb this place, you'll turn the whole population against you. So those are the unintended consequences of that particular road. I think that as much as he was maligned for his statements, Obama was really on the right track when he started talking about negotiating with the Iranians, and I don't see why you would do anything else as your opening step, but that's another issue. Iran is the only real winner of our invasion of Iraq. We have eliminated their two most powerful enemies, the Taliban in Afghanistan, which is a fundamentalist Sunni organization, Iran being a fundamentalist Shia government, and secular Iraq, with whom they fought a war for how long? 8 years? A bloody, awful war for 8 years. And we, in one fell swoop, we have removed all of their real enemies in that part of the world, leaving a major power vacuum, which the Iranians are absolutely delighted to fill. The Iranians refer to what we call the Arab Gulf as the Persian Gulf, and they always have. And there is a sense of irredentism in Iran about the Gulf and about their, how should I not say God-given right, but their historical authority to have more influence in that part of the world than they have had over the past couple of hundred years. So that Iran is emboldened, and their goals are facilitated by what is going on out there right now. They have increasing influence in Iraq, in the Gulf, in Syria, and in Lebanon. They've been very judicious with Hamas and Hezbollah. They've been really smart the way they've handled these organizations. And Hezbollah in Lebanon is a very respectable political organization that brings food and medical care and housing to the Shias in southern Lebanon. And the same is true of Hamas in the Gaza. So that they're not dumb. These guys know what they're about. And we need to be conscious of these realities when we talk about what we're going to do in that part of the world. In Iraq, and this is probably, none of this is probably news to you. God knows I write about it all the time, but Iraq has never really been a voluntary nation. Iraq is an agglomeration of tribal entities, and beyond that, of religious and ethnic groups. There is nothing in Iraq. Did I say Iran? I'm on Iraq here. Okay, thank you. God, at my age, you never know. The only thing historically that has kept Iraq together has been a repressive management. Saddam Hussein, the generals before him, I can't remember the name of it, but the civilian government before that, the Turks before them. Somebody has always been in charge of that part of the world and told them that they were not allowed to kill each other anymore. And if you kill each other, we'll kill you. When if you look at what Saddam Hussein did while he was there, he killed a whole bunch of them. And so they were quiet. And they will be quiet as long as they have that kind of repressive government over them. But there is, I submit to you, little reason and no evidence to believe that left to their own devices, they are going to happily reconcile and create harmony in Mesopotamia. Folks, it ain't going to happen. Now, if you believe that, and you don't have to believe it, I do. If you believe that, if you believe that there's empirical knowledge that tells you that's the way it's going to go, then what are we doing? The surge, which everyone was really strongly against, including Obama, a lot of the Congress, the Democrats were very much opposed to the surge, has been a resounding military success. I mean, the level of violence in Iraq has dropped precipitously since that surge started. I mean, you just can't deny it. That's a simple fact. But the other fact is that the surge was conducted to create enough space, enough quiet, to enable reconciliation among these different ethnic and religious groups. It hasn't done a damn thing. There's almost no progress toward that reconciliation. So, is it going to be any different if we're there or not there? At what point do you get to the point where you can say, oh, it's okay now? Where's the information, where's the evidence that tells you, yes, they're going to create a country, they're not going to kill each other off? Because that's when we say we'll leave. I mean, it's a dismal prospect. But I will tell you further. Look, I did my undergraduate and graduate work in Russian. And they sent me out to Beirut to recruit Soviets. That's why I went. Had a hell of a time. I got so fascinated with the Middle East that I started looking at it much more critically. And since that time, and that was in the late 60s, since that time I have spent a lot of my own personal time looking at the Middle East. I am not a Middle East expert. I knew what was going to happen. I had a piece in the Rutland Herald about 2 months before we invaded Iraq, and the title of the piece was On the Road to Chaos. I don't know half of what real experts know about that part of the world, but there are these facts that are inescapable, and you can get them all right out of any good book on that region. So for me, it goes back to my notion about how you have these experts, and then you have no input from the real area experts, and I think that's a major problem for us. We have. I admire Petraeus. I admire General Petraeus because, faced with an almost impossible task, he has made about as much out of it as you could hope he might. They started this program with the Sunni tribes, the Awakening program, where they started to buy off different Sunni tribes to stop killing us and start killing Al-Qaeda, and it's worked. I mean, there are a lot of things that go into the relatively peaceful situation in Iraq today that are not directly the result of the surge. This is one of the causative factors, and that process creates another whole problem down the line, because what we're doing is we're arming, training, and funding the Sunnis who, when we leave, will become the objects of the attention of the Sadr army, of the Shia irregular armies. So in effect what we're doing is we're setting up a counterbalance for, a really super duper civil war. So it's one of these double-edged things where, maybe you don't think it all the way through, or maybe you think it all the way through and say, the hell with it, what's most important is that we get some sort of peace out of this thing right now. Now, I'll get to it. Oh, wait. I get caught up in these things. I'm not very emotional about this, you can tell. Let's go to Afghanistan. We're on the cusp of committing additional troops to Afghanistan. As I said to you before, the issue in Afghanistan is a counterinsurgency issue, not a counterterrorism issue. It has elements of counterterrorism in it, but not much. They are historical. They devolve from the support given to Al-Qaeda by the Taliban. That's not a big thing right now. So basically, the big issue right now is a counterinsurgency, and the question is how do we deal with it? The numbers that I read to you about the results of operations against terrorism are right on. The results of operations against counterinsurgencies are that counterinsurgencies are rarely, if ever, beaten. And the reason is very simple. Counterinsurgencies are built around local populations. They can't exist or survive without support from the local population. Whether that support is voluntary or coerced, they have to have it. The only way you can get at them is to weaken that support. And if your policies, essentially a military approach to the problem, if your policies are in effect causing you additional problems on the ground in your counterinsurgency, then your tactics are wrong. And you really need to start thinking about what you're going to do. And that's where the whole business of Petraeus and his work with, or the Army's work with the awakening groups of Sunnis in Iraq is really important. Because the Taliban is not a close-knit, homogeneous group. It is like every other larger grouping in the Middle East, a mixture of all different kinds of tribal elements. And some of them are hardline, tough, the guys who blew up the Buddhas back before 2001. And some of them are there because it's convenient to be there, because the rations are good, because the rules are okay, for their own reasons, and they can be persuaded one way or another to break with it. And that is something, they're beginning to talk about it right now. The Army in Afghanistan is beginning to talk about this as a possible tactic to replace a military approach to the insurgency. If you're going to be successful against an insurgency, you have to work on the mechanism that supports it, to modify it to better suit your goals. We'll talk when I'll get on with this. I want to finish up with some of the things that we might be able to do. And I think probably I start right in with this new administration. It seems to me, and to many of the people with whom I communicate, that the best the new administration has to offer in the Middle East is a total change of policy. And the most constructive things that are available to the United States government in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan are changes in policy, a recognition of the realities on the ground, and change to policies that are built to function against those realities. And then that's where we really need to go. In Afghanistan, that means dealing with the tribal entities that are a part of the Taliban, trying to weaken the Taliban by buying them off, persuading them, renting them, whatever you want to say, but by somehow peeling them away from that core group of Taliban who are in effect running the insurgency against us. The same thing is true in Pakistan. The reality of the insurgency in Afghanistan is that it's Pashtun and it cannot be separated from Pakistan. It's one entity. So you can't solve it in one country and not solve it in another. We are not going to solve the problem of the insurgency in Afghanistan by blowing up safe houses in the Northwest Territories of Pakistan. That's not going to help us. It may kill it may occasionally kill some guy we don't like, as apparently it did last week. But the potential for collateral damage is so great that it probably is a counterproductive activity in terms of your overall goals. Syria is a problem for us because, well, you've seen another recent attack that we made on, apparently made on a Syrian Al-Qaeda safe house. The Syrians are looking for cover. We have been totally unaccommodating, but they are looking for some way to save their posteriors. Yes. And are almost certainly available for discussions, beginning at least on a lower level. The Syrians have a traditional role in the Middle East. It is more focused on Lebanon, where Syrian irredentism is so strong that they still think that they're in charge. They still think that Lebanon is part of Syria. And that's good because the Lebanese know how to deal with that and the Syrians know how to deal with that. What we need to do is persuade Syria that it's not a good idea to continue to muck around in Iraq. And they are probably persuadable. There is also the issue of the Golan Heights, and apparently both they and the Israelis are interested in resolving those issues of the Syrian territories seized after the 1967 war by the Israelis, and in fact are talking about them, perhaps as we speak, without our knowledge and certainly without our involvement. On poor old Lebanon, a beautiful country. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but an absolutely glorious place. I should tell you a story. When God created the earth, this is a Lebanese story, they tell this on themselves. When God created the earth, he was fooling around over on the eastern end of the Mediterranean, and he said, well, you could have some nice mountains there, so he pushed up these beautiful big mountains, and he put some snow on top of them, and he covered them with trees, and worked down the slopes, and made this green littoral right along the edge of the Mediterranean with beautiful sandy beaches, and stood back and he looked at it and he said, you know, that's really not fair. That's way too beautiful. That's the most beautiful place I've ever put on the face of the earth, so I've got to do something about it. So to compensate for it, he put the Lebanese there. That's their story. The poor Lebanese are tossed into a country that's probably not as big as Vermont. I'm sure it's not as big as Vermont geographically. They have all of the problems of the Middle East. They have the Shia, the Sunni, they have Druze, they have Christians, they have Jews. I mean, they have everything. And they are just totally at the mercy of the Middle East. So whatever happens in the Middle East is going to translate right into Lebanon, to their misery. Most importantly, I think I'd like to finish with this and then open it up to questions. In terms of what we can do about terrorism, we need to stop calling it a war. We need to stop thinking that we're going to solve it with military action. We need to minimize our enemies and maximize our friends in the region. That's the most critical part of this conflict with fundamentalist terrorism. We need to cut out their support from their own people. And in fact, Al-Qaeda has been rapidly losing support because their handling of civilians, their cavalier murdering of Arab civilians in Iraq is so deeply resented by other Arabs and so counter to the teachings of the Quran that they've really been losing a lot of support that they had picked up over the years. So that's a good thing, and we should be pushing that. We need to dump our policies of preemptive unilateralism. We need to stop provoking anxiety at home. We need to change the way we deal with terrorism within this country. We are watched on a daily basis by the rest of the world to see how we're doing, what we're doing, and we're not helping ourselves in any respect this way. I've almost gotten to the point where I don't like to get on an airplane anymore. We need to stop torture and renditions. In that respect, when Vice President Cheney told us that we were going to the dark side, as he did, apparently the military establishment was told that they were going to the dark side, and they said, you're going there without us. We are not going to do that. And the military has steadfastly refused to be programmatically involved in any torture activities at all. So they looked around and they found the only organization that had no experience with torture at all, and they said to the CIA, "You're going to do it." And they were so goddamn dumb, they said, "Okay, we'll do it." And that's where we got it. The involvement of the military was totally inadvertent, and it came from the fact that the CIA, knowing absolutely nothing about torture, went to the military and said, "How do you prepare your troops to withstand torture?" They figured if they could learn how we taught people how to withstand it, that they could figure out how to do it. So there's this program in the military called the SERE program, S-E-R-E, and that was then the basis of the torture, the waterboarding, and all of that stuff that the CIA picked up and started to work. We need to tone down our rhetoric. The pronouncements of senior administration officers throughout this war has made me cringe. I can't, it's so awful I can't even remember any of them, but this sort of braggadocio, bravado, we'll go get them, we'll kill them all, and this kind of stuff. Stop all that. We need to reassemble our alliances and our liaison relationships with friendly intelligence services. As I said earlier, that's the key to handling this problem. We need to stop trying to save the world for democracy. And in that respect, in Iraq and probably in Afghanistan, perhaps the best we can hope for is a stable government that maintains order in those countries, that is neither democratic nor terribly benevolent, that employs the Sharia, the Quran, the Sharia, and the Hadith, the basic fundamentals of Muslim law. They will look like nothing of which we think we approve, but it might look very much like what they're used to and what they believe in. And that may turn out to be the best solution for this part of the world that we're dealing with today. We need to tidy up ourselves and become that shining city on the hill. And we were that for a very, very long time. And when we were that shining city on the hill, we were respected and admired abroad. And I think we can get to that point again. And when we do, people will be free to import democracy if they choose. But we will not be wanting to export it. Well, I thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Say more about collateral damage.
Well, collateral damage. The only way you avoid collateral damage is with really good intelligence, okay? In other words, I need to have somebody on the ground in Waziristan who can tell me that that house, and it gives me the coordinates, is a holding point for Al-Qaeda fighters going into Iraq, into Afghanistan, or into Iraq. Into Afghanistan. Where was I? It was Waziristan. If I know that, and if I have the proper equipment, which is going to be one of these drones with a missile on it, I'll blow that place up and everything will be perfect. It works beautifully if the intelligence is good and if the damn thing shoots straight. Okay? But if either of those is off, then I blow up a house outside Baghdad where I believe all of the leaders of Al-Qaeda are meeting, where in fact what's going on is a wedding party. That's collateral damage. And it is an unfortunate adjunct, byproduct of this kind of war, so-called war against terrorism. Yes?
How do you get Americans to accept spending money to bribe people as opposed to military money, which is much more expensive? Because it seems to me there's something in the American psyche that just doesn't like the idea of offering bribes to keep people happy.
True, absolutely. Well, that's a cultural question, really.
Yeah.
I don't know whether whether Americans think that all bribes are criminal activity, and I suppose in this country they are, but in the Middle East, that's the way life works.
Yeah.
It's called bakshish, and without bakshish, life doesn't move. I think that there's some intangible part of the American psyche that really likes wars. I think there is. That's a tough thing to get past. If you really like war, and if you think that war is going to be a solution to virtually all your foreign policy problems, which is essentially what the neoconservatives have thought, then it gets really difficult to get them to move off that. I don't know how you do it. We never bribed people when I was working in the Middle East. We used to rent them.
Yeah.
Sir.
I'd like to know what you think our policy in Iraq should be.
Let me tell you what I think the logical ultimate end is for that country. For that geographic area. I believe that the divisions, the animosities are so profound between the different warring constituencies that the logical end is either a dictatorship of some sort or a division, probably voluntary, into logical, political, and religious and ethnic groupings. In other words, some sort of voluntary division into maybe an overall republic of some sort. That's what I think it will come to.
That's what it will come to, but what should we be doing?
Well, that's a big question. If you think that that's wrong, that this was a popular position 4 years ago. There were a lot of people, Leslie Gelb, for example, thought that this was the way it was going to go. Joe Biden was another one. I shouldn't raise his name here because we all know he has a flapping jaw, but he was on that train as well. The point I would make is that you have two choices. You can say we can get them there, which would mean we would shepherd them and make them do this. In other words, we would replace Saddam as the controlling power. Or you step back and you say, you guys are on your own. What are you going to do? What do you want to do? Now, my own personal take on that is that there will probably be a lot of people killed. And that ultimately they will become so tired of killing each other that they'll work out some sort of accommodation. The alternative to that, I really believe, is that we will stay. And we will stay forever. Way in the back.
You seem to imply, or at least I took it this way, that
I deny it.
the Obama administration would possibly be as ideologically based in its foreign policy and as academically based as the Bush administration and the neoconservatives. Do you really expect that from the Obama administration?
No, I don't. No, I don't. And I didn't mean to imply that. I took it as a contrapuntal example to counterbalance my comments on the Bush administration, saying that it could be true of the Obama administration as well. No, I don't think that's true. Again, I don't really know. I know who his advisors are, and I think he's got a smashing group of advisors so far. At least they look pretty good to me. So I'm heartened by who he has around him. And he looks to me like a person who's prepared to listen to people who know what they're talking about. I mean, look at the group he's got around him on our current economic issues. It's a very impressive assembly of very dignified, powerful people. Yes, sir.
Given the very long-term antagonism between the Arab groups and the U.S., such as I guess starting with the initial bombing of the World Trade Center. And do you remember what date that was?
93? Is that when it was, 93? 93.
Yeah. And I take it, an enormous budget of the various security agencies that we have, the CIA and NSC, military intelligence agencies,
Right.
all the intelligence. My basic question is, where are the grown-ups? Why are there virtually no Arabists even now in our security agency? Why didn't this get started back in '93?
Well, I'll give you a lame explanation. At the end of the Cold War in 1991, President Clinton declared a peace dividend. And the peace dividend was that all of the hundreds of millions of dollars that were going into the intelligence effort would be returned through a reduction in taxes to the people. Because absent a Cold War, we didn't need all that apparatus and we didn't need all those people. And at the same time, he put some people in charge at the agency, at least, where I had some familiarity, who were not persuaded that there was any real role for the CIA as an intelligence collection organization. And the result was that there was massive attrition during the 1990s. The agency was wandering, leaderless, without guidance, without knowing what was expected of it. And that's not a position into which you want to put an intelligence organization, believe me, because what they do is they get in trouble. They're active, creative, imaginative folks, and when you don't tell them what to do, they do something just to see if it works. But at any rate, masses of them left, including, I'm told, 90% of the language capability of the agency. Now, I know that because a number of my former colleagues who retired in the 80s were asked to come back. One, in particular, an old friend who had served in Belgrade during the Cold War, was asked to come back as chief of station in Belgrade as a retiree because they couldn't find anybody who could speak Serbian. And that was it. The problem now is exacerbated by the disinclination of a paranoid government to clear anybody for classified work who looks a little different or who speaks one of these strange languages. Oh, well, no, it's okay to be homosexual. No, I'm serious. Oh, no, not at all. No, not anymore. They used to, but not anymore. So it's a historical problem that hasn't been solved. And I wrote an op-ed about this. I write on intelligence issues for the Baltimore Sun, and had an op-ed on this some time ago. And somebody had said, "Oh, don't worry about it." I think it was George Tenet. Had said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll have this all cleared up. We'll have a new bunch on hand. In 5 years, we'll be right back up to snuff." Well, that's absolutely absurd, because you take a young officer into the agency and you put him through training. You put him through familiarization with what it is he's going to be doing. You give him language training, and you don't get him to the field before he's been employed for 4 years. And when you put him in the field, if you're the station chief, believe me, I know, you don't let that guy loose because you don't know what he's going to do to you. So you put him into situations where you know there's no real problem, and 5 years later, when he's a senior experienced case officer, if he's not a wild yahoo, you can turn him loose on his own. So it's a very long, complicated process getting people to be effective in that business. In the back.
All right, I was just wondering, say what ends up happening, like you say, maybe the end state, regardless of what we want, it ends up being a possibly authoritarian regime, maybe an Islamic regime, maybe a secular one, maybe one with Sharia, I don't know, just an authoritarian regime of some shape. What's to stop the administration of that regime from coming to a similar conclusion to that Saddam came to, that its interests aren't in line with America's interests anymore, and they adopt a more hostile approach to foreign policy as it relates to the United States? Are we just back to square one then? Are we just going to be back to where we are now in 20 years? We're going to have to go back and do it all over again, or is there something else we can do?
Well,
I mean, particularly if it's an Islamic regime, I mean, I would imagine that they could possibly be more susceptible to anti-Americanism, depending on the local population.
Look, their attitude toward us depends entirely on what they think of our policies. If our policies are the policies that we're using today, they're not going to like us. But there are policies available to us that will get us where we would like to go, which is having a peaceful, stable Middle East, without preconditions about what form of government is going to exist there or how it's going to run. Frankly, the possibility for the establishment of dictatorships, well, look around the Middle East. That's basically what you've got. It's just part of the process out there. Some of them are really repressive. Some of them are mildly repressive. Some of them are quite enlightened. I mean, the king in Jordan is an enlightened, he's not even a despot. He's an enlightened king.
Well, I guess what I'm saying that concerns me isn't so much the idea of a dictatorship. I mean, whatever form of government another country takes, that's their own business. I don't really care. What concerns me is when that becomes my business, if they decide, like I said, maybe they want to take a different path. I mean, whether they're a dictatorship or not. I mean, right now we got a bunch of dictatorships, and some of them seem to be working better than others, and that seems to be impacting.
But don't you take that chance in any part of the world? I mean, isn't that part of living in a world? And the answer to I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm a mean old New England Republican. But part of that is if your policies are baiting them, if your policies are being stuffed in their faces, then you've got to expect that they're going to swing back at you. So much of your scenario depends on a really negative policy coming at them from the United States, which doesn't have to be the case. And you get into this. What happens in Afghanistan if we are able to peel away some of the tribal groups and weaken the Taliban to the point where they are willing to talk to us, which they're not interested in right now, but where they're willing to talk to us. One of the preconditions for whatever they want from us could very well be that we will, I did that, didn't I? That we will remain involved in their counterterrorism programs. Because what we don't want is for Al-Qaeda to come back in there and reestablish a training camp back up in the mountains. So those are things, I think those at least are potentially manageable issues.
Right. Well, I guess that's what my bottom line was. What are some specific policies that we could adopt that would be constructive to that goal, that would minimize the likelihood of the scenario I suggested occurring?
Yeah. Well, I think that they are there and they are available, and they are basically the antithesis of everything we've been doing for the last 8 years. Back there.
Have you ever heard the theory advanced that one of the reasons that the neocons wanted to invade Iraq was for the protection of Israel?
Oh, sure. I don't know that to be a fact, but I've heard that advanced. It certainly makes sense. Yeah. Sir.
In the summer of 1982, the Israelis staged an airstrike in Iraq, and their target was the Can-Do nuclear power plant.
Right.
That was Iraq 1.
Right.
My question, and the Can-Do nuclear power plant is the only kind of nuclear power plant where the spent fuel rods go in. The fuel rods go in and out of the plant directly, and it makes it impossible to keep track of the plutonium that comes out of the plant. It goes in uranium and comes out plutonium.
Okay.
And my question is, was there ever any rapport made between the plant that the new plant that Saddam Hussein was working on getting or had at the time of our invasion and WMD?
Well, he had
capability of making atomic weapons.
He had completely given up his aspirations for atomic weapons. That's been established in the post-invasion intelligence.
Yes, but didn't he have a working Can-Do plant at that time? Or
No, the Israelis blew it off the map. The Israelis blew it off the face of the earth. There was no functioning atomic plant in Iraq at the time. I don't think there ever has been once the Israelis blew that one out. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I have no recollection of a functioning.
I thought they had one. I thought they had one now.
No.
Be watching Fox News.
Way back.
Two-part question. First part, you were in the CIA since the early
Early 50s.
Early 50s.
I'm really old.
You familiar with Richard Galen's book, The Service?
I don't know Richard Galen. I mean,
But he wrote an autobiography published in the 70s.
well,
Did you ever
he was the head of the SS, or head of the German intelligence service.
Well, for the Eastern Division.
No, for the Western side. The Galen organization was the BND, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, and he was the chief of the BND after the war, after the Second World War.
But
Yeah.
then he came to work for the CIA.
Well, I mean, they were very friendly service.
The point is, in his book, he had a really interesting point about intelligence, where he said that we really get a lot of intelligence just reading what's not classified.
Absolutely.
Newspapers, books. So, to take his advice, which seems like good advice because he seems smart, we're 6 years out from the invasion of Iraq. You agree that the policy, especially the military policy, the war on terror is faulty.
Yes.
The RAND thing, what is it? I did the odds, right? It's a 1 in 14 chance of the military approach succeeding.
Yes, 7%.
But to get to 6 years out, invasion of Iraq, certainly a lot of criticism, both on the left and the right, for the policy itself. Where can we look? Do you think there's any authoritative books or articles that would tell us what were the motivations for that policy?
What were the motivations for our policy?
Exactly.
Well, I tell you what the motivations were.
Well, somebody mentioned Israel, you discounted.
Oh, no. I love this. Oh, yeah. I mean, I was a case officer. I spent my life trying to get people to do really dumb things. From their point of view, not from my point of view. And to do that, you have to know why people are functioning. You really have to know what their motivation is all about. I mean, I could never have a candid relationship with a Soviet if I didn't know why he was interested in it. It just wouldn't work that way. So the result of that is that after 30 years of being a spook, it's just part of who you are. And you got to know why this is happening. I have to tell you, I watched Iraq for 4 years before I finally sorted out where it was all coming from. And it was a perfect storm. It was a president who was a run-of-the-mill, mediocre, okay, nice guy for a year and a half, but who was never going to really make it big, right? Because there's nothing going on. And he desperately wanted a legacy. And his legacy was 9/11. His legacy made 9/11 made his legacy possible. So he was in it for a legacy. Rumsfeld was in it because his charge in the first year and a half, 2 years of the administration was to turn a Cold War army into a functioning 21st century military establishment. And he had done that, and he wanted to prove that he could take X number of troops and just whoosh, have a blitzkrieg and win. Okay? There was a vice president who desperately wanted to reestablish the primacy of the presidency, who was terribly upset about the erosion of relative powers as seen from the White House of the presidency. So you had all those things coming together, and then all of a sudden 9/11 falls into their lap. And isn't it interesting that the first thing that was said even before 9/11, but after 9/11 was, we got to attack Iraq. It had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with 9/11. Whatever they said, it still has nothing whatsoever to do with 9/11. But there's your motivation.
Would you take any credit to some of the criticisms?
Whatever they said, it still has nothing whatsoever to do with 9/11. But there's your motivation.
Would you take any credit to some of the criticisms?
As a reasonable explanation of why we invaded Iraq.
Have you read Greg Powell's recent book, Our Madhouse? He posits a great theory that a lot of the chaos in Iraq was two competing factions on the U.S. side. One who wanted to get the oil pumped, just pump it like crazy, drive the price of oil down, and so they'd sort of try and pull the policy one way. And then the other group which said, the oil companies, oh no, we like OPEC, we like controlling, less oil is better. And so his theory is that what you've see is a lot of the chaos is these two policies. You actually can see it with different people being put to different positions, and it's just a complete mess. and then that might explain some of the Halliburton. It's just the opportunism.
Well, look, you know, I think there's an endless area for profitable speculation. And I come from an organization that knows something about conspiracies, right? And I'll tell you that I'm really surprised. This is the first time. God, here I am. Wow, I like you people. It almost never fails that somebody gets up in the audience and says, "You're a damn liar." Absolutely unprovoked. Why am I a liar? You're in the CIA. You guys ran 9/11. Never fails. And look at you people. I mean, we're an hour and 25 minutes later and it hasn't hit the surface. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's an oxymoron.
That's me.
But I'm not following this issue on the oil. It just seems to me that this country, that there would be tremendous motivation to ensure a steady supply of oil. And Iraq sits on what? The second largest reserves in the world. And you seem to dismiss that.
I have a really hard time making that work as motivation. Let me tell you something. If that would require an extraordinarily carefully run operation to be able to do that successfully. And I have run a lot of extraordinarily complicated operations unsuccessfly. And the reason is that the more complicated they get, the more likely they are to fail. And my standard response to the issue of some sort of hand out there manipulating things is that you're not going to get away with it. Someone's going to blow the whistle. And the more people who know about it, the less likely it is to be able to be kept quiet. So I tend to be pretty merciless about these conspiracies, as attractive as they are. I mean, and you know, the thing about a good conspiracy is it's all built on observable fact. It's just that your conclusions may not be right. That's what I can say.
Excuse me, I've got a cold.
Oh.
No, I've had it a week.
Oh, you're okay then.
I'm not okay. What do you think of Weiner's book about the CIA?
I think he's a no good. Oh, I'm sorry.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I will.
Well, I think he makes an excellent point about where the CIA went wrong when it moved from, after World War II, from intelligence gathering to actions such as military interventions, assassinations, and finally torture and rendition. I mean, I think it's a great book.
Well, the question is, what do I think of Tim Weiner's book, The Legacy of Ashes? I don't know if any of you have read it. It's the unofficial history of the CIA. And he interviewed me extensively during the course of writing that book, and said piously, I didn't believe him, but I didn't care. But he said, "Don't worry, I'll check everything out with you. I'll bounce everything off you again before it goes to print." And he walked out of my house one day, and I never saw him again. And printed all kinds of things that were half-truths. And since most of what he got came from my colleagues, guys that I regularly talked to, the same was true with almost every case of colleagues of mine whom he interviewed. And in effect, what he did was, it was a classic case of French reasoning. He decided what his theory or thesis was going to be, and then he selected out of the information made available to him those elements that supported his thesis. So he was, well, for example, I talked to him about Soviet recruitment operations and said that we had never recruited a Soviet who was able to tell us about Soviet intentions. And I said, and the reason for that is that the only people who knew really about Soviet intentions were members of the Politburo. And no one had access to members of the Politburo. We never saw them anywhere, inside or outside the Soviet Union. They were inaccessible. So it was a perfectly cogent, tidy statement. And all he did was take the first sentence and castigated us for never having produced intelligence on Soviet intentions. And that was typical of the way he wrote the book. There was some scathing reviews written by non-CIA people, academics who follow the intelligence business.
Haviland, how long do you want to go here? I know you have
We're not going back to Williston tonight, so.
Okay. I'll leave it up to you to cut it.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, so in news stories, we often hear the phrase American interests, and I used to feel like I really understood what that meant, and perhaps it's the confusion that I've felt over the course of the Bush administration, but I now feel like I have no idea what the term American interests mean when I hear it in the media. Can you tell us what you think that phrase means in the context of news stories, and then what you actually feel American interests are, or should be?
I have absolutely no idea. Now, I have a very strong notion of what American national interest is. But that's a definable item. American interest? Anything that interests America. You know, I don't know. That's a sloppy formulation to me.
I've begun to cynically suspect that phrase is used to mean American business interests.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
What do you think our interests should be?
Well, I think that the national interest involves issues that are of critical importance to the survival of the United States, economic, political, and military survival of the United States. That's very easy to define, for me anyway. And you take a look against that definition, look at what we're doing, and you'll have your own notion about whether or not that's in the national interest. But that's, to me, that's the yardstick. Yes?
My sense of the neocons is they're really not interested in your opinion. They know the answers.
They're not interested in mine.
Right, or anybody else's. They know where they're going, but where does Condoleezza Rice fit into that?
Or what has she done?
You know, it's hard to be. I think she's over her head. That's all. I really think she's over her head. I don't think she's malevolent. I don't think she's stupid. She's just over her head. I mean, how'd you like to deal with those people on a daily basis? Good God Almighty. Sir?
Early on, you said that you thought that the Iraq situation might be the undoing of President Obama's. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, you see, I have a very hard time in my own mind working out a formula for getting out of there. I mean, I have always said we need to get out of there, but that's pretty easy to say. And I'm not a military person, but the logistical issues involved in moving 160,000 troops and millions of tons of equipment to Kuwait is just a staggering prospect. And then there are the political considerations. I mean, Obama's been really careful recently. He has modified his terms when he's talked about getting out, and he's talking how it became orderly. Well, that's another qualifier on that, another modifier. So I just think that it's going to be a terribly difficult thing to accomplish, politically and militarily and internationally, and it's going to be unkind. It almost doesn't matter if my formulation is right, and it may not be, but if my formulation is right about the inevitability of conflict and that internal conflict, then it doesn't matter who the president is. It's going to go badly, and that president will be the object of considerable criticism from the other side of the aisle, and maybe his own side.
The United States has always been very focused on Israel in terms of any dealings with the Middle East, And there have been many different ideas suggested about why so much influence and power and concern is expressed for Israel. From your perspective, what's your understanding about the importance of Israel and where that comes from?
Well, I think that this country was in the forefront of those that condemned the Holocaust, and I think that's had a holdover effect on our policy toward the founding of Israel and toward its survival. And I believe that this country, and it's not a partisan thing, this country, both parties in this country are absolutely wedded to the concept of defending Israel at any cost. And I make no comment on that. That's the way it is. So in that respect, that's pretty well known around the world. It's pretty obvious that that's what our policy is founded on. So if you are an Arab or someone who looks at that part of the world less passionately than we do, perhaps more objectively than we do, then you will find fault with our policy. And you will find that our policy is one-sided and favors the Israelis over the Arabs and is unfair. But it is what it is. The Israelis have very few problems. Their main problem is their survival. And in that sense, their entire foreign policy is devoted to promoting their survival. And they are very, very good at it. If they weren't, they wouldn't be there. So, they've done a good job promoting themselves here, and we've been receptive.
I think maybe one more question.
One more question.
And then if
one
there
from someone who
people
hasn't
want to
asked.
stay around for
Yes,
talk,
sir.
This is, you said your opening and your closing remarks about how it is important for us to get back in good graces on the world stage.
Yes.
With the current administrative change that we're going to have, hopefully that'll be for better, but thanks to Pakistan, things will be worse. What specific items do you see us getting back into good graces with, say, the EU, with Germany versus Spain, per se?
Well, I think just start out with basic changes in our Middle East policy.
Would you have anything more specific than that?
Sure.
That I already knew.
Look, we have got, if there's going to be any kind of lasting peace in the Middle East, if we're ever going to get any order there, we're going to have to solve, we are going to have to become a part of a solution to the Palestine problem. This is not a loaded thing to say. It is simply true. The Palestine impasse is a thorn in the side of the Arabs, whether you like it or not, and it will continue to motivate terrorism, the bombing of Israel, the shelling of villages, as long as it is not resolved. So it has to be resolved. That's one thing.
That's going to help the EU. I'm talking about the European.
Sure, because that's a change in our policy in the Middle East. Okay? The reason the EU is so goddamn, well, now they have recent reasons for us to be even angrier with us, but the reason that we fell off the edge of the cliff was all around our Middle East policy, and it was around our simple statement to them was, we're not interested in what you have to say about, see, it's an omen. We're not interested in what you have, we're not interested in what you Europeans have to say about our policies. We're going to do this whether you like it or not. So get on board or get the hell out of our hair. The minute we change that attitude, then they'll start looking at us again the way they looked at us before.
But again, you're speaking of them as a single entity.
You asked about the EU.
Yes, but I'm talking about specific parts of the EU. Like Spain,
no,
much more forgiving than Germany or Pakistan or...
Well, sure, there are going to be national variations all the way along. I mean, different countries have different policies. The Germans have a policy about what their troops do when they're abroad for a lot of very good historical reasons. But, that would take a PhD thesis to go into that. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much.